Hi there, everyone. I know all of you guys out there on Instagram are watching right now. Hope you guys are all doing well. Happy Tuesday. I have had a day or two. I've come back from the week and I'm well rested, but I know we have a lot to talk about today. So I wanted to say hello and thank you guys all for joining. Everybody out there on Facebook and YouTube, hello, how are you doing? We missed a few Sunday night lives, right? And that has been because I was on vacation and a much needed vacation. You can probably tell from the tan here. But I thought it was important to get online and to have a conversation. I think it's time that we talk about what's happening around us. I don't think we can pretend like it's not happening. Some of us are in a little bit of a state of shock, right? We've come out of this quarantine and right out of the quarantine, and just as things were trying to get back to normal and we were looking for our new normal, we are now dealing with a country divided and race wars and a void in leadership, a complete hole and a lack in leadership. And it's very frustrating, and I think it's challenging for all of us as we sit back and watch, just like honestly, coronavirus and COVID was incredibly challenging and hard to watch all of that happen as well. But I think at the end of the day, it's really important for us to remember that we are one community, we are one family, and we really do need each other, and we're dependent on each other to make change lasting, and to move the conversation forward. So I'm going to begin with just talking about current events and asking if any of you have ever experienced racism of any form or kind. We've got people joining in from all over the world. And if you are from all over the world, just kind of wave over to me. I didn't announce this. This is a very impromptu live, by the way. Usually I announce and warn you guys, but we were supposed to have Stephanie Abrams on from the Weather Channel, who is amazing and hilarious. And obviously I miss not having her, but we'll reschedule her for another time. So you're stuck with me, but we have a lot to talk about, so I'm not really worried about it. And one of the things I want to talk about is racism and my firm belief that racism is a public health issue. It's a disease, it's a medical issue. And let me tell you why. I was talking about this with some people the other night, and they were saying, well, we're not born racist. How can you say it's a disease? Well, here's the deal. We're not born with cardiovascular disease, right? We're not born with obesity. We're not born with an autoimmune disease. But again, it's the culmination of multiple factors that will trigger this feeling within us and make us treat people differently. And that is our call. It is our call to overcome that, to get past that, and to move forward. Let me tell you guys what I see in the exam room. Here's what I see in the exam room. I see racism and oppression in very subtle and very quiet ways. Please understand that it's not overt. It's not someone saying, hey, you're this or you're that, but it's subtle. It's not getting invited to that get together. It's not having your friends play with people of different colors. It's not being included in a particular club or organization. It's not being noticed, right? When the door opens and, there's a room full of people of one type and you're a different type. It's being dismissed. And that feeling of being dismissed can be very quiet and very low, right? Very low tone, low frequency, but then suddenly can escalate and build on itself. And then in other cases, it's so obvious, people avoiding one another because of the color of their skin, people going out of their way, they walk one way and you walk a different way. But here's what happens in the exam room. All those feelings of being isolated or rejected or abandoned or disenfranchised or financially disempowered, all of those feelings and how that makes somebody feel results in their numbers. And those numbers are numbers that you and I talk about all the time. We talk about things like high blood pressure, diabetes, being overweight, having heart disease, the risk of stroke. So many of these conditions that are now rampant across our globe. They're just not even an American story anymore. They're everywhere. And so when we sit back and think through how do we help humanity? How do we help us all become a better human race, a better group of humans and people united together? We need to understand that this issue of racism, just like cardiovascular disease, just like autoimmune disease, just like PCOS, all these things that I talk about all the time, needs a comprehensive approach, needs a 360 approach. Today is Blackout Tuesday. We're not supposed to, just found out, use that hashtag Black Lives Matter in association with it. But it is Blackout Tuesday, where executives and moguls and people in the music industry are posting Black images, as you've seen on my feed as well, to really think about what's happening, the racial injustice, the death of George Floyd, all of these things that have been transpiring in the country for years and then seems to reach a simmering point right now. So on Blackout Tuesday, I think it's important to evaluate ourselves, to look deep within yourself and ask, what sort of constructs have you been educated to believe? We're not born with racism, but as early as 2 or 3, we start to differentiate. We start to understand that they're different and that they are not like me. And maybe I go over here and not go over there. So, what do we do about that? How do we educate? How do we immerse each other into different cultures and into different situations? How do we have sympathy for our stories? That is the change that needs to happen. The laws help, right? Equal rights help. It helps to, make sure things are in place, protective measures are in place. But overall, for each of us individually, it is important for us to understand how we educate ourselves and change the programming that we're all subject to as we walk through life. I can share my own personal story. I see people saying, "Hi, Lanita." Oh my goodness, I love seeing names that I haven't seen in forever. Lanita, I hope you're doing okay. I hope you're well. This is a tough time. I hope everybody from my old ER family is hanging in there. But thank you for joining and watching, and huge hugs to you. I hope your family's well and all is going well with you. But I do want to share a story of my own. I'm going to try not to get emotional about this particular story. So here we go. So you guys know that my parents were immigrants. They were first generation here in this country. Classic story, like so many immigrants, didn't come with a whole lot, came with an education, both of them, but didn't come with a lot of resources or money or any of those type of things. So worked really hard and believed, in us, and believed in education as the tool to empowerment. And my mother's story was even more profound and even deeper, where she was in a troubled marriage, an arranged marriage, and really had to fight for what she believed in and what she wanted out of life. And so she's got so many stories of her own, and someday maybe we need to do a live with her and get her on here to talk about it. She's quite a character. But I'm telling you all of this to help you understand the context. Because they believed so much in education, they wanted the best for me, just as many of you may also want the best for your children or for yourselves. So I was put in the best schools. Many of those best schools were all white. I was often the only brown girl or Indian girl in the area, in the grade, in the school. It depends on where I was. We moved so many times, and I was in so many different schools in the US, most of them, quite honestly, in the southeastern regions. And, I remember a childhood and a history. It's interesting because my daughter will question me on this, of being isolated, of not being included, not being invited to the parties, not being asked to sit at the lunch table, not being asked out, not being asked to the prom, all of these different things. And I remember a very discerning teacher looked me critically in the eye and she said, "Just you wait." She goes, "Wait till you get out there in the world and all of this isolation will go away." She explained to me, you're living in a fishbowl. And in this fishbowl, the community of the fishbowl cannot see past the glass walls it has constructed and created. But someday you'll be out of this fishbowl and you'll understand that this whole world lives out there and they don't see you the way these people see you. And for me, that was my childhood, right? That was my childhood. That was my youth. And it was a youth of feeling rejected, feeling not good enough, feeling like I never could live up. And so what do people do? They often overcompensate or they gravitate towards their own where they get acceptance. And so what happens next is fascinating, and when I think back on it, because I'll be honest, I haven't thought about race in a while, and it's not something that is on the forefront of my mind. But when I think back in the context of what's happening today, a lot of these things were there in my experience as well. And my experience is a micro piece of what so many Black people, African Americans, go through today. So I'm not trying to equate the two, but I'm trying to equate the feeling the feeling of being rejected, abandoned, isolated, not paid attention to, not heard, and how that feeling sticks deep within your soul and hurts you so deeply that you struggle for years to get to the other side. And so I go off to college, and here's what happens in college. It's fascinating. I found this massive group of Indian and Pakistani and brown people, different races, different, different, all from different parts of the world and country, who welcomed me with open arms. And that feeling of identity and acceptance was honestly not something I'd experienced throughout my entire childhood and educational life up until that point. And that feeling propelled me forward. It took away those feelings of being different and abandoned and isolated. And it really gave me confidence and self esteem for whatever was next. And then that in turn, once I felt better about myself, the next phase of my life was going to med school. And in med school, we had a varied crowd. We didn't have this big population of children of immigrants that I did in college, and we had a predominantly white medical school class. However, because I felt differently, I responded differently to all the people around me, and that was one of the most loving groups of people that I can remember, and we still are in touch to this day and embraced me 100%. And some of my craziest stories that we'll share one day and my funniest moments are from that time of my life. Everything from, well, I'm not going to share those right now. Might ruin my reputation, but those guys were very easy to get me into trouble there. But anyhow, but they were just incredible, and it had nothing to do with race. We were bound educationally. We were bound because we had the same values, and we were bound together because we had the same goals. And now as I track through my life and go through all the different walks and paths that life has had to offer to me, for which I'm so incredibly grateful, it's interesting. I meet all kinds of people. The beauty of a medical practice is that it is democratic. Anybody can come in, and I meet everybody, and I hear everybody's story, and I understand their perspective and where they're coming from. I'll never forget an African American woman who looked at me in the eye and said, "Do you have African American patients, Dr. Taz?" And I'm like, yes, I do. Why would you? And in the moment, I was like, why would you ask me that question? And they asked that question because it's important for them to be with someone who understands their story. And in telling stories and in understanding each other's stories, that is where we will see change, and that is where we will see progress. I think when we separate and build walls and borders and try to differentiate and say they're like this and I'm like that, then we have no empathy and we have no sympathy for the journey that somebody else has walked. So in this era, I don't even know what to call it. What are you guys calling it? In this time, in this bad dream, in this weird movie, whatever you want to call it, I think it's important to remember the importance of story and how your story matters, and what you have to say matters, and what you have to feel matters, because at the end of the day, our stories are about how we felt, and how we feel is the energy that we project out into the world. So if we can help one another feel better and hear their stories, then we're going to have a different planet, and we'll have a different type of leadership. We'll have a different type of community, and we'll have a different place to call home. So what's the way forward? Do any of you guys have ideas? Anyone have ideas of how to move forward? I've been thinking about this, and there's so many different ways, right? There's so many things we could think to do or hope to do, but I do think it begins with education. And I do think it begins with cultural immersion. And that in turn gives us that empathy, that sympathy. Here's another story that I like to tell. Sorry, I'm full of stories today. But, in thinking through all of this, by the way, sidebar, total off track, but Ebola is raging in the Congo. We're not hearing anything about that right now because everything else is occupying our brain space. But remember last year, around this time, I was in Africa. I was in Uganda. For those of you who followed me for a while may remember that. And that trip was amazing. But this is what struck me the most about that trip. On that trip, we were working in villages where women and been abandoned. And they were abandoned because in their culture, when your husband dies and you're let out, essentially as a woman, you're sort of kicked out, and you're kicked out with your children, and you're considered a disgrace to the family or to the community, and a burden, essentially. So these abandoned women, along with their children, were taken in by this amazing organization called Watato, and communities were built, or homes were built, where you put women and abandoned children together, and created micro families. And these guys didn't have a lot, right? They lived on rations that came into the store, very starch based, very heavy food that was leading to a lot of weight gain and those type of things. Their community was the small village around which they walked and talked, and had a community center and a place to gather and to be together. There was an orphanage there that my children loved going to, where they got to play with the babies and do all of that. And I'll never forget, I went with some members of the Center Spring MD team, and they tap us on the shoulder and they're like, "You're going to go talk to these women." And I'm like, "Okay, what am I talking about?" And so they very quickly said, "Oh, about health. You're going to talk about health." Now, mind you, we had shown up unprepared, had no idea we were going to do this. So I look at Christina, if any of you know her, who's one of my nurse practitioners. I look over at Christina. I'm like, "Okay, we're going to go talk to these women." And we walk into this community center, and there are literally, I think there are like 300 women in there, and they don't speak English. I mean, the English or the dialect that they use is a little bit different, right? So they weren't understanding me as well. And so I had to speak really slowly. And if any of you have been following me, I like to chatter away. And so I had to slow my pace down of speaking. And it was fascinating. I started with like, how do I connect? How do I reach these people? So the first thing I asked them, I'm like, "What are the things that bother you the most?" And I gave them a minute as they processed that information. And then we slowly dialed it down to the four things that were bothering those women the most. It was their weight, it was anxiety and trouble sleeping, it was depression. Many of them were suffering from depression, and many of them were just tired. They had chronic fatigue and they were tired all the time. None of those may be surprising to you, but here is the surprise for me. Those were the exact same complaints of my patients at Center Spring MD. Those are the exact same complaints I hear when I travel and I speak in LA or Chicago or New York or all of these other places. Those are the exact same complaints that I get in a media segment, or that I get when I am doing some of these social media things. And it struck me that those women, like women all over the world, are the same. We have the same battles. We have the same challenges. It's just the exterior is different. That's all. It's almost like we at the root are struggling and wanting solutions for the exact same things. But one group's opportunities may be different from the other, but both groups are walking around empty and really not able to get to the root of what they need. So I only tell you that story to wind down through how a daughter of immigrants, somebody who felt racism, saw racism, felt isolated, felt rejected, found acceptance, found incredible love and support even before I met my husband. And now really see the world as united and see through the barriers, the boundaries, and the walls that we all put up for ourselves and for each other. So, my challenge to myself and my challenge to all of you is that we're better than this and we can do better. And wherever you're sitting, whether it's here in America or around the world, look inside your own soul and see if there's an element of racism that's been handed down by your culture. I know it's prevalent in the Indian culture. I know it's in other cultures as well. And what can we do to dispel that feeling of racism where one skin color has more authority than another and it leaves people feeling less than? How do we break through that? How do we change that? Those are the questions I'm grappling with and struggling with as we move forward and continue to watch the coverage in the news. But I think it's challenging us to stretch ourselves, go beyond our boundaries, go into other neighborhoods, invite somebody over for dinner, make a new friend, immerse yourself in a new community, bring communities together, whatever you can do, whether it's big or small, even the smallest action makes the greatest impact. So that is what's on my mind today. And that's the reason for this very impromptu live. And any ideas that you have, or if you have experiences of your own that you want to share with me, jump on in and let us know. I think we are, at the end of the day, one family, one community, and it's important for us to stay united and stay together. Now, there's a ton of COVID updates. Let's do that at a different time. I'll probably jump on live in the next day or two to run through all the new studies, new recommendations from the World Health Organization about masks and how far to stay apart from each other, a study out about choline and how taking choline helps women who are pregnant kind of prevent any sort of consequences of COVID-19. There are a host of studies to talk about all the updates of COVID-19. So I'll make an announcement of when we'll do that live. That's coming soon. So stay tuned for that. But for today, on Blackout Tuesday, examine yourself, your family, your communities. What can you do to make a difference in this conversation? And what can we all do collectively to see change? And remember, this issue is a disease. It is a public health issue. And we have to figure out a way to come together to move this conversation forward. We can't just depend on the government. We can't just depend on the financial sector. We can't just depend on our entrepreneurs. It's really something for each of us to join in and change the way we think about this. In my opinion, it's a public health disease. It is a disease. It is handed down. It is ingrained. You're not born with it, but just like many other diseases, it develops over time. So what is it going to take to change us all? I'll leave you with that thought. DM me if you have more thoughts, and we'll go from there. I hope you guys all have an amazing afternoon. Stay healthy, stay well, stay superpowered. If you want to join the Taz Tribe for more of these Facebook Lives, discounts, and special events, remember to go on to drtaz.com and click Join My Tribe, and you will see all kinds of fun happenings there. We have all kinds of other things up happening at every moment, new courses, new programs, new products, all of that going on as well. So check out my website, drtaz.com, and I will talk to you guys soon. Take care. Bye-bye. And thanks for joining me everywhere. I love this. This is fun.